So if you do ever get the chance to buy a home, you ever have the money put together to afford one, you're probably not going to pay for it outright. Even billionaires tend not to pay for their homes outright, as we talked about earlier, because buying a house is probably the most expensive purchase you'll ever make in your life. Which is why, when we talk about getting one, we work with it in terms of a loan, where in particular, a mortgage is a loan designed for buying a house, for buying property, that is property you can live on in particular, rather than property as in just a thing that you have. Where those of you who know any French will probably recognize the roots of the word mortgage in terms of the two parts there, mort and gage. I don't know, it doesn't quite sound right on its own, but it's been a long time since I took French, so I can't remember how you pronounce that. But the point is there, it translates directly from Old Latin through Old French as death pledge. Which isn't to say that people who signed onto mortgages were expecting to pay them until they died, because they wouldn't be very good at paying things off after they died, so loan holders wouldn't be very happy with that deal, obviously. Really, what it referred to more was that once the loan was finished, it was considered dead, and if the property was not paid off, if the loan wasn't paid off, then the property itself might as well be considered dead to the person who took the loan. As said by Sir Edward Coke in 1664, if the borrower doth not pay, then the land which is put in pledge upon the condition for the payment of the money is taken from him forever, and so dead to him upon condition. And if he doth pay the money, then the pledge is dead as to the tenant. Where, forgiving my silly accent, as far as medieval mortgages went, they didn't quite run as we have them today, where we're talking about getting a loan so that we can get property. Instead, the idea was to offer your property as collateral to have a loan where if you failed to pay off the loan, you would lose the property in the process and you'd be forced off the land to try and figure out how to live somewhere else.
Maybe there ain't no sin, there ain't no virtue. It's just what people does. Some things folks do is nice, and some ain't so nice. And that's all any man's got a right to say.
And even though lending at interest was illegal at that time, it was considered a form of usury, as we talked about earlier in the chapter, lenders would still charge pretty hefty rent on there, and they'd collect profits from the land, so it wasn't terribly uncommon for people who took out mortgages to default on their loans. That is, to fail to pay them off, and thus to get kicked off of the land.
I'm living in America, and in America you're on your own. America's not a country, it's just a business. Now pay me.
Where in particular, the need to document that they were paying off their debts often also fell on the debtor. So if the person who gave out the loan pretended, hey, I didn't see my money this month, well, it might not end so well for the person borrowing it. And situations like these helped develop what would become debtors' rights through court cases such as Vernon versus Bethel of 1762, where the litigator in charge of that, Sir Robert Henley, would state, "Necessitous men are not truly speaking free men, but will submit to any terms that the crafty may impose upon them." And this phrasing, this sentiment, would be echoed by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in proposing his second Bill of Rights in 1944, where he would rephrase it as,
"True individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry, people who are out of a job, are the stuff of which dictatorships are made."
Where in America before the Depression, we had mortgages closer to the way things are now. It wasn't so much that you would give up your land to get money. You would, again, take money so you could afford land, but, well, they often required much higher down payments, were much harsher in terms of interest rates that would only actually end up paying off the interest itself. so then you get stuck with another balloon payment at the end, and the interest would only accrue over a short period of time, usually less than 10 years. So even though mortgages did offer the dream of homeownership, the American dream, if you will.
Do people have any idea what they are buying?
See, I focus on the immigrants, you know? Once they find out they're getting a home, they sign where you tell them to sign. Don't ask questions, don't understand the rates.
A lot of people weren't able to pay them even pre-Depression, and certainly not following that point where most people and even most banks didn't quite have the money to handle that sort of situation. Where, as a result of the Great Depression, as part of the New Deal, the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, and the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, FSLIC, were put into place through the National Housing Act of 1934, where these were made to help make sure that banks could handle the mortgages and that people would be able to afford them. In particular, the FHA was made to regulate was made to regulate the criteria for the terms of mortgage loans, to be a little bit more specific there, though it only did so for white Americans. The concept of whiteness was a bit sticky back then. It still is very, very much now, but there was that bit of redlining, which we will be seeing more of later. And also the FSLIC insured the value of loans until it was replaced by the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, in 1989 as a result of the savings and loan crises of the 1980s, where the system that we have today is the result of such crises and litigation and regulation going through until we get to systems that work for as many people as possible, until inevitably more crises, more litigation, more regulation comes into place to hopefully improve things, but not always. Where modern Americans looking to get a mortgage do so in terms of what are called long-term installment plans that often take more than 30 years. The most common type of mortgage is a 30-year mortgage, so I guess that we are getting back towards the terms in the original way that mortgages were defined as death pledges, because, well, if you're signing on for something for 30 to 50 years, that's a long time to be alive, is how I'll put it. But it's still very expensive. For example, the median price of homes sold in Fort Myers, Florida in August of 2021 was about $300,000. And even though reports have placed Southwest Florida as among the best places in the country for capital gains income, that is, people here have made a lot of money on the stock market, again, $300,000 is a lot to put down at any one time. So we still do think of these things in terms of the loans, and how we pay them off varies depending on things like the amount that the whole cost of the home will be, the amount that we put down, the down payment, which we'll talk about in a bit, as well as the interest rate, and for the interest rate, both how much it is and the type of interest that is being accrued, where the interest rates are either in terms of fixed rates, it's a fixed value that stays over the entire course of the mortgage, or what are called adjustable rate mortgages, ARMs, where the fixed rate ones are the most common kind, and often they have a little bit of a higher value initially, while the adjustable rate ones can change, they can fluctuate with property values and inflation, and often start out a little bit lower, but may end up being much higher in time.
It's pretty confusing, right? Does it make you feel bored or stupid? Well, it's supposed to. Wall Street loves to use confusing terms to make you think only they can do what they do. Or even better, for you just to leave them the f*** alone.
The most common type of mortgage overall in America, the one that 90% of Americans who have a mortgage use, is a fixed 30-year mortgage. Where when you are buying the house, when you're setting up the loan, when you are setting up the mortgage, generally people pay a down payment up front. That's a percentage of the total cost, and that percentage is usually around 6%. You can put in more if you want to try and get more favorable terms. You can put in less if you don't have as much available to you right then, but this is money that goes directly to the seller in the deal. And in terms of how these things work, there are some risks involved with putting down more rather than putting down less. While you can generally get yourself friendlier, more cost-effective terms on your mortgage down the line if you put a higher percentage in up front, it also may result in you not getting quite as much out of your home equity. And for that matter, if when you buy the house after a year or two, it turns out it's haunted or something and you need to move out, you're not going to get your down payment back. That is almost assuredly lost. And I'll say that in particular when we're talking about these sorts of things, we're talking about values being a reason to do or not do something with a house, that kind of gets into the distinction between things being thought of as private property, that is an investment vehicle, versus personal property being a thing that you use, but I don't need to get up on my high horse about how people use their money on that stuff. Anyway, the amount of the mortgage, the final thing that we talk about here, is the amount that you take out in your loan. That is the amount of money left over from the total after the down payment is paid. So there's a lot that goes into here, and what we're mostly going to focus on is the amount that comes out. That is how you pay the mortgage, how much is in the mortgage, how you split that up over time, how much of it ends up with the bank, what you do with interest rates, all those fun payments, which actually work a lot of the same way that we see with cars, and that's what we're going to start looking at next.